The table was cleared, but the real clue appeared after. Welcome to Marshshadowfiles. I am your host, Oliver Vane. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. I truly enjoy hearing from you. Let's begin. If you've worked with Nero Wolfe as long as I have, you learn that when he starts asking about menus, he's already 3 steps ahead and hasn't bothered to tell you where he's going. It isn't secrecy for the sake of drama. It's efficiency. He won't clutter the air with conclusions until they're polished enough to survive being spoken. Mrs. Hart had just finished listing the courses: consommé, trout, duck, salad, cheese, and something French and fatal involving apricots, when Wolfe grunted approval. "No coffee at table?" he asked. "No. We moved to the sitting room for that." "Who poured it?" "I did." "Not the waiter?" "No." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because I prefer to control certain details." I made a small note in my head. Sacred table extended to sacred coffee. Wolfe nodded as if she had confirmed a private suspicion. "Then during the removal of the table settings," he said, "the waiter was alone in the dining room?" "Yes." "And thereafter free to move between dining room, pantry, and kitchen without observation?" "Yes." "And your guests?" "They remained in the sitting room." "All of them?" "No. As I said, Mr. Taine lingered near the dining room, and Milo Vane disappeared briefly." "How long?" "A minute or 2. "Twice?" "Yes." Wolfe closed his eyes again, but this time I knew it wasn't digestion. He was fitting pieces into compartments, labeling them, and deciding which ones deserved attention and which could wait. Mrs. Hart leaned forward. "You see? The paper could have been left then." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "It could also have been left earlier, unnoticed, or later, after the discovery of the body." "I told you. It wasn't there during dinner." "You told me you believe it was not there. Belief is not evidence." Her mouth tightened, but she held it in. That was good. Wolfe doesn't like brittle people. "What about the candlestick?" I asked. "The one that rearranged Emil's skull. Where did it come from?" "From the sideboard," she said. "A matched pair of silver. One remained. The other was used." "And after?" "It was on the pantry floor." "Any fingerprints?" "The police took it." "Good for them," I said. "It shows initiative." She ignored that too. She was learning fast. Wolfe said, "The phrase, 'ask for Emil,' implies that Emil was known to the writer as a point of access, a conduit." "Yes." "Was that so?" "I don't know. He was a waiter." "Waiters frequently are more than that," Wolfe said dryly. "They are ears, eyes, and occasionally mouths." I said, "Depends on who's paying." Mrs. Hart turned to me. "You think someone used him?" "I think someone might have thought about it," I said. "Whether Emil agreed or didn't get the chance is still open." Wolfe nodded. "Just so. Now, Mrs. Hart, the essential question: why would anyone at your dinner require access that only a waiter could provide?" Her gaze shifted, not away, but inward. "Because of what was discussed." "Which was?" She took a breath. "The foundation, its finances, its future. Disagreement. Yes. Intensity. Yes. Threats." A pause. "Not openly. Covertly. Yes." That satisfied him more than a speech would have. He hates adjectives but respects admissions. "Detail it," he said. She did, and as she talked, I wrote. The Bellport Foundation had money, old money, her father's, and obligations, the kind that come with reputations. Lately, according to Mrs. Hart, there had been discrepancies. Funds allocated one way, appearing another. Grants approved that should not have been, and others denied without explanation. Mr. Haft, the treasurer, blamed accounting delays. Mr. Taine, the executive, blamed bureaucracy. Mr. Dykes, the lawyer, blamed both and hinted at something worse. Milo Vane wanted more support for his compositions. Evelyn Marr wanted the whole institution burned down and the ashes salted. "Pleasant company," I said. "No," she said. "Necessary company." Wolfe's eyes opened. "Why necessary?" "Because last night I intended to force a decision." "What decision?" "To audit the Foundation independently." "Against resistance?" "Yes." "Whose?" "All of them," she said, "for different reasons." That was better. Motives were lining up like taxis in the rain. "And Emil?" Wolfe asked. "What had he to do with this?" "Nothing, so far as I knew." "And now?" "I don't know." Wolfe leaned back a fraction, which for him is like pacing the room. "You will remain here for the present." "I can't," she said quickly. "I must return. The police—" "You will return when I say you will return," Wolfe said. "Until then, you will be available." She stared at him, measuring. "People do that, and most of them come up short." "And if I refuse?" "Then you may leave, and then I will telephone Inspector Kramer and deliver to him the paper you have concealed, with your explanation." That settled it. She sat back. "Good," Wolfe said. "Archie, you will go to Mrs. Hart's apartment." I sighed. "Of course I will." "You will examine the dining room, the pantry, and the kitchen. You will speak with the maid. You will observe without interfering with the police. I'm charming that way. You will also attempt to determine whether Emil Vaughan had associations beyond his employment. Friends, enemies, debts, secrets. The usual." "Yes." "And the suspects? You will not interrogate them, not yet. Just admire them from a distance." "Precisely," Mrs. Hart said. "I can give you the address." "I'll take it," I said, though I could probably follow the police. She told me, and I wrote it down. As I stood, Wolfe added, "Archie." "Yes?" "Do not be diverted." "I never am." He looked at me. I looked at him. We both knew that was a lie, but a useful one. I got my coat and hat, nodded to Mrs. Hart, and headed for the door. As I reached it, Wolfe said, "Archie." I turned. "The tablecloth." "Yes?" "Examine it." "For crumbs?" "For absences," he said. That was Wolfe. He never asks for what's there, only for what isn't. I went out, down the stoop, and into a New York afternoon that had decided to be colder than it looked. A taxi took me uptown, and as we moved through traffic, I went over it again. 6 guests, 1 dead waiter, a paper that shouldn't exist, and a table that had been cleared too soon. By the time I reached Mrs. Hart's building, I knew 2 things. First, that someone at that dinner had needed Emil for something he didn't survive. Second, that Wolfe already had a guess about what that something was and wasn't sharing, which meant I was about to do the legwork without knowing which footprints mattered. That, as I've said before, is the story of my life. Mrs. Hart's building had the kind of quiet that costs money. Thick carpets, discreet lighting, and a doorman who looked as if he had been trained to distrust everyone equally. He gave me a professional once-over, decided I might belong somewhere, and let me pass after I gave the name. Upstairs, the apartment door was open, which usually means either confidence or trouble. In this case, it meant police. A uniformed man stood in the hall trying to look both alert and invisible, which is a trick they teach early. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I told him. "Mr. Wolfe sent me." He blinked once. She then nodded as if the name had been issued to him in a briefing. "Sergeant Rowley, Inspector Kramer's on his way back. You can look, but don't touch anything unless you're told." "I'm housebroken," I said. The dining room was exactly what you would expect from a woman who treats a table like a sacred object. Long, polished wood under a white cloth that probably had a pedigree, chairs placed with military precision, sideboard aligned as if it had been measured with calipers. But the order had been disturbed, not in any obvious wreckage, but in the small ways that matter more. The cloth was smooth, but not perfectly. I moved closer. There's a difference between a tablecloth that has been cleared by a careful hand and one that has been disturbed after that clearing. And it's the difference between a straight line and one that looks straight until you follow it with your eye. Here, near the center, there was a faint irregularity. Not a wrinkle, but a memory of one. I didn't touch it. Wolfe had said examine, not rearrange. "Mr. Goodwin." I turned. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-40s, apron, eyes red but steady. The maid. "Yes?" "I'm Clara. Mrs. Hart said you might come." Good. I like being expected. I gave her a look that usually loosens tongues. "You found him?" She nodded. "In the pantry." "Show me." The pantry was off the kitchen, narrow, efficient, shelves lined with order. On the floor, a faint chalk mark showed where Emile had been when the police found him. There was a dark stain that had been mostly cleaned but not entirely persuaded to leave. "Walk me through it," I said. She did. After coffee, she had begun clearing the kitchen. Emile had been finishing in the dining room. She had gone back and forth twice, then stayed in the kitchen for perhaps 10 minutes. When she went to check on him, he wasn't there. She assumed he had stepped out or gone to the service entrance. Later, when she went into the pantry, she found him. "Anyone else in here?" I asked. "No." "You're sure?" "I would have seen them." "That's what people always say," I told her, not unkindly. She didn't like that, but she held her ground. "I would have." "Fine. Before dinner, did Emile speak with anyone?" She hesitated. "Not much, but enough." "Yes," I said. "Who?" "I don't know his name. One of the gentlemen." "Which one?" "I didn't see his face." "Just—" She lifted a hand, indicating height. "Tall, and his sleeve. Dark blue." I kept my face neutral, and that made two of them with the same half description. "Where?" "In the passage by the kitchen." "What were they doing?" "Talking, quietly." "Did Emile seem upset?" "No." "Did the gentleman?" I couldn't tell. "Helpful," I said. She flushed. "I'm telling you what I know." "And I appreciate it," I said. "What about after dinner? Anyone come back here?" "No, I was in the kitchen. If someone came, they would have had to pass me." "Unless they came from the dining room," I said. Her eyes flicked toward the door between rooms. "Yes." "Did you hear anything? A sound? A movement?" "No." "Nothing at all?" She shook her head. "Only—" She stopped. "Only what?" "A small noise. Like something light being set down." "When?" "I don't know. After I started washing. I didn't think anything of it." I nodded. Most people don't think about the small noises. That's why they're useful." I left her and went back to the dining room. Sergeant Rowley had followed and was pretending not to watch me. "Anyone been in here since this morning?" I asked. "Just us," he said. "And Mrs. Hart earlier." "Moved anything?" "No." "Good," I said, though it wasn't entirely. I circled the table slowly. 8 places had been set. Only 6 used. The extra settings had been removed. The silverware had been replaced on the sideboard with the kind of precision that borders on obsession. But one thing was off. On the sideboard, near the candlesticks, there was a faint gap. Not visible unless you knew to look for symmetry. One candlestick remained. The other, of course, had gone into Emile's head and then into evidence. But the space beside it had been adjusted. Not perfectly, though someone had nudged the remaining one slightly inward, as if to disguise the absence. That told me 2 things. First, whoever had used the candlestick had either returned to the dining room or had done the adjusting before leaving. Second, they cared enough about appearances to try to correct them. That narrowed the field a little. Not everyone notices symmetry, and fewer still bother to fix it. "Where's the sitting room?" I asked. Rowley pointed. The sitting room was softer. Chairs angled for conversation, a low table, ashtrays placed where hands would reach without thinking. I walked through it, not looking for anything in particular and finding the usual collection of almosts. A glass that had been moved, a chair slightly out of line, a cigarette butt that didn't match the others. I bent to look at it. "Problem?" Rowley asked. "Depends who smoked it," I said. It was a different brand, stronger, harsher. Not the kind Mrs. Hart would choose for herself, and not the delicate sort I'd expect from a cousin with opinions. I filed it away. Back in the dining room, I stood where Mrs. Hart would have stood when she returned for her cigarette case. I pictured it, the cleared table, the empty room, the sudden appearance of that strip of paper. Ask for Emile. It wasn't a message meant for her, that was clear. It was a direction, a signal, and it had been left where it would be found. Or not, which meant timing mattered. I stepped closer to the center of the table and leaned in, careful not to touch. There it was again, that faint memory of disturbance. Not a wrinkle, a placement. Someone had put something there after the cloth had been smoothed. Something light, like a strip of paper. And Clara had heard a small sound. I straightened. "Sergeant," I said, "who found the body first?" "The maid." "And who saw it next?" "Me and Officer Jenkins. Then we called it in." "Anyone else before you?" "No." "Good," I said again, though it still wasn't. I took one more look around, then headed for the door. "Leaving?" Rowley asked. "For now. Inspector'll want to talk to you." "I'm easy to find," I said. "I live with a man who doesn't leave his chair." That got a flicker of a smile. Out in the hall I paused. There was one more thing to do, and Wolfe hadn't told me to do it, which usually means he expects it. I rang the bell of the apartment across the hall. A man answered, thin, curious, wearing the expression of someone who collects other people's lives for entertainment. "Good afternoon," I said. Archie Goodwin. Did you happen to notice anything unusual last night, around 10 to 11? Hi, his eyes lit up. Police already asked me that. And I told them nothing. "Tell me anyway," I said. He leaned in, lowering his voice as if the hallway might object. "There was a man. Left Mrs. Hart's place in a hurry. Around 10:30. Description: tall, dark coat. Blue sleeve?" I asked. He blinked. "Could be. I didn't examine him. Face? Didn't see it. Which way? Downstairs? Fast. Anyone follow? No. Anyone come back?" He thought. "No. Thanks," I said. As I walked away, I added it up. A quiet conversation in the kitchen passage. A note placed after the table was cleared. A small sound. A man leaving in a hurry at 10:30. A dead waiter found later. And somewhere in all that, a reason. Sir Wolfe had told me not to be diverted. I wasn't. But I had a feeling the diversion was already built in. The taxi ride back gave me just enough time to arrange the pieces without convincing myself they fit. That's a discipline I recommend. Never admire your own theories before they've had a chance to betray you. By the time I reached the brownstone, Saul Panzer was already in the office, occupying a chair as if he had been poured into it and allowed to settle. Saul doesn't waste posture. He had a hat on his knee and a look on his face that said he had been told something interesting, but not enough to satisfy him. Wolfe hadn't moved. Mrs. Hart had, but only slightly. She was now sitting straighter, which meant she had been thinking and didn't like where it led. "Archie," Wolfe said. "I went. I saw. I didn't touch," I told him. "Except the neighbor's curiosity, which is apparently public property." "Report." I did. The tablecloth, the faint disturbance, the adjusted candlestick, Clara's statement, the quiet conversation in the passage, the small noise, the cigarette in the sitting room, and the neighbor's man in a hurry at 10:30. Saul listened with his head tilted, not interrupting, which is his way of collecting details the way other men collect stamps. When I finished, Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "Timing," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "That's the hinge." Mrs. Hart leaned forward. What does it mean? It means, Wolfe said, that the note was placed on the table after it had been cleared and smoothed. That act produced a slight disturbance, perceived later by Mr. Goodwin. The maid heard a small sound consistent with such placement. Therefore, the writer returned to the dining room after the removal of the settings. That's what I said, she insisted. You said you believed it. Mr. Goodwin has observed it. She didn't like that distinction, but she accepted it. Saul spoke for the first time. The man leaving at 10:30, before the body was found, suggests the act was completed by then. Or interrupted, I said. Or both, Wolfe murmured. Mrs. Hart said, But why leave the note at all? Why not simply... She stopped. Simply kill the waiter, I offered. Efficient, but not communicative. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. The note was not incidental. It was intended to convey information. The question is, to whom? To Emile, she said. Possibly, Wolfe said. But if so, it was placed where Emile would see it only if he returned to the dining room after completing his duties. And why not give it to him directly? Saul said, unless the writer didn't want to be seen giving it. Or, I added, unless Emile wasn't supposed to see it alone. That got a glance from Wolfe. Not approval, he doesn't hand those out, but acknowledgement. Mrs. Hart said, You think it was meant to be found by someone else? I think, Wolfe said, that it was meant to be found under specific conditions, which have not yet been established. Saul leaned forward slightly. You want me on the guests? Yes. Begin with Mr. Leonard Dykes, Mr. Russell Taine, Mr. Julian Haft, Mr. Milo Vane, and Miss Evelyn Marr. Ascertain their movements last night between 10 and 11, also their financial positions, associations, and any irregularities. Saul nodded. I'll start with Dykes. Why? I asked. Because lawyers lie professionally, Saul said. That's a prejudice. I told him, it's an efficiency, he said. Wolfe said, also the waiter, Emile Vaughan. Learn what you can of his background. Employment, acquaintances, debts. Saul rose. I'll report by evening. He left without another word. That's Saul. He doesn't decorate exits. Mrs. Hart turned back to Wolfe. And me? You will remain here, Wolfe said. You will recount the dinner in detail, including every remark of consequence, every movement, every deviation from your expectation. That will take time. I have it. She looked at the clock. The police... Inspector Kramer will come here, Wolfe said. I have invited him. She stared. You told him. I told him that you had delivered an item of relevance. He will wish to discuss your conduct. Her hands tightened. You said... I said I would not compound your idiocy, Wolfe said. I have not. I have prevented it from worsening. I decided to stay out of that. When Wolfe and a client are negotiating honesty, it's best to be furniture. Begin, Wolfe said. She did. She described the arrivals, the greetings, the seating. Wolfe had her reconstruct the table. Who sat where? Who spoke first? Who interrupted? Who deferred? He had her repeat conversations, not for content alone, but for tone. It was slow work, the kind that would drive most people to impatience. Wolfe thrives on it. I watched her as she spoke. There were places where she moved quickly, places where she slowed, and one or two where she almost stopped. Those are the places you circle. When she came to the moment about the table being an honest witness, Wolfe stopped her. Repeat that. She did. Leonard Dykes had said it with a kind of dry amusement. Context? Wolfe asked. They were arguing about accountability, she said. Mr. Haft insisted that records spoke for themselves. Mr. Dykes said records can be altered, but a table, who sits where, who eats what, who avoids what, tells its own story. Interesting, Wolfe murmured. I said, he sounds like a man who enjoys watching people chew. No, she said. He enjoys watching people lie. Better, I said. Wolfe resumed. Continue. She moved on. Milo Vane's absences, Evelyn's hostility, Taine's charm, Haft's defensiveness. It was all there, layered and polite on the surface, with currents underneath that would have drowned a less composed hostess. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. You omitted something. She stiffened. No. Yes. What? You have not stated why the words on that paper endanger you. I told you, you told me nothing, Wolfe said. You will tell me now. She met his gaze, and for a moment I thought she might refuse again. Then something shifted. Not surrender, but calculation. Because, she said slowly, Emile was not merely a waiter. That got all of us. What was he? I asked. She looked at me, then back to Wolfe. He was someone who had been asking questions about the Foundation. Wolfe didn't move, but the room did. What questions? He asked. About money, she said. About transactions that didn't align. On whose behalf? I don't know. You expect me to believe that? Wolfe asked. No, she said. But it's the truth. Then you are either careless or complicit, Wolfe said. Which? Her voice dropped. Neither. I was trying to find out who was using him. I let out a low whistle. So Emile was already a conduit? Yes. And last night, Wolfe said, someone attempted to use him again. Or silence him, I said. Wolfe nodded. Indeed. Mrs. Hart leaned forward. Now do you understand why the paper matters? Yes, Wolfe said. It is an instruction to access a conduit who was already compromised. That implies knowledge, specific knowledge, on the part of the writer. And that knowledge, I said, was sitting at your dinner table. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The bell rang. I went to the hall and opened the door. Inspector Kramer stood there, hat pushed back, expression set somewhere between irritation and anticipation. Goodwin, he said. Where is he? Right where you left him last time, I said. And you're just in time. We've been talking about a dead waiter and a note that shouldn't exist. His eyes sharpened. Have you now? Come in, I said. You'll like this. Or you won't. Either way, it's yours. Kramer came in like he owned the place, which he didn't, but he has enough history with Wolfe to act as if the deed might eventually come through the mail. He stopped just inside the office, took in Mrs. Hart, then Wolfe, then me. His eyes settled last on Wolfe, where they usually end up when there's trouble. All right, he said. What have you got, and why am I hearing about it from you instead of from my own men? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He lifted a hand toward me. That meant I was to do the honors, which I did, briefly and without embroidery. I told him about the paper, where it had been found. Or rather, and not found by his men, and how it had come to Wolfe. Kramer's face didn't improve as I talked. When I finished, he turned to Mrs. Hart. You removed evidence from a homicide scene, he said flatly. Yes. Why? Because I didn't trust what would be done with it. That's not your decision, he snapped. No, she said. It isn't. But it was my risk. Kramer studied her for a moment, then shifted back to Wolfe. You've got it. Wolfe handed him the envelope. Kramer took the strip out, read the 3 words, and read them again. His brows drew together. Ask for Emile, he said. That's it? That is it, Wolfe said. Kramer looked at me. You think this is something? I think it showed up after the table was cleared, I said, which means someone went back in, and someone didn't want to hand it over directly. Kramer grunted. Or someone wanted it found later. Exactly, I said. He turned to Wolfe. And you? I think, Wolfe said, that the writer of that note possessed knowledge not generally available, specifically that Emil Vaughan was a point of access. Kramer's eyes flicked to Mrs. Hart. That so? She hesitated a fraction too long. Yes, Wolfe said for her. Mr. Vaughan had been making inquiries regarding the finances of the Bellport Foundation, on whose behalf is unclear. Kramer's gaze sharpened. You didn't mention that this morning. No, she said. Why not? Because I didn't know if it mattered. That's not your call either, he said. It is when it involves my name, she replied, and there was steel in it now. Kramer looked back at Wolfe. You're telling me the waiter was snooping into foundation money, son, and somebody at that dinner knew it and left him a note? I'm suggesting that possibility, Wolfe said. I'm also suggesting that the timing of the note and the subsequent death of Mr. Vaughan are not coincidental. Kramer paced once, which for him is as close as he gets to thinking out loud. All right, who are the guests? Mrs. Hart gave him the names again. He knew two of them already, Dykes and Haft, and didn't like either. I've got men talking to them, he said. So far, nothing. They all stayed in the sitting room after dinner, according to each other. According to each other, I said. That's a sturdy alibi, if you don't mind the cracks. Kramer ignored me. We've got the candlestick, no clear prints. The maid says she didn't see anyone go into the pantry. Neighbor saw a man leave around 10:30. Tall, dark coat, I added. Possibly blue sleeve. Kramer snorted. That narrows it down to half of Manhattan. Less if you assume good tailoring, I said. He gave me a look, then went back to Wolfe. What are you doing in this? I have accepted Mrs. Hart as a client, Wolfe said. Since when? Since she entered my house. Kramer shook his head. You don't even know what you're looking for yet. I know precisely what I'm looking for, Wolfe said. The identity of the person who left that note, and the reason for doing so. The homicide will follow. Kramer's mouth tightened. The homicide is my business. Indeed, Wolfe said, and you will pursue it with vigor. I will pursue the logic. That paper is evidence, Kramer said. I'm taking it. Of course, Wolfe said. You have already done so? Kramer looked at the strip in his hand, then back at Wolfe. You made a copy? No. You memorized it? Yes. Kramer grunted again. Figures. He turned to Mrs. Hart. You'll come down to the office later. We'll take a full statement and don't leave town. I have no intention of doing so, she said. Good, he said, because if you do, I'll have you brought back. She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. Kramer moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back. One more thing. This waiter, Vaughan, we checked his room. Nothing special, no records and no notes. If he was asking questions, he wasn't writing them down. Or someone removed them, I said. Or he wasn't as clever as you think, Kramer shot back. Or someone cleverer thought he was, I said. He ignored that and looked at Wolfe. If you get anything, you call me. Not after, not when it suits you. When you get it. I will inform you of any facts relevant to your investigation, Wolfe said. That's not what I said. It is what you will receive. Kramer stared at him for a second, then shook his head again and left. When the door closed, the room settled, but not back to peace. This was a different kind of quiet. Tighter, more focused. Mrs. Hart exhaled slowly. He doesn't like you. No, I said. But he'd miss us if we moved. Wolfe ignored that. He was looking at the envelope, though it was no longer in his hand. Archie, he said. Yes? The cigarette in the sitting room. I nodded. Different brand, stronger, not Mrs. Hart's style. Which of the guests would prefer such a brand? Mrs. Hart answered. Mr. Taine. He smokes constantly. Strong cigarettes. Noted, Wolfe said. And Mr. Vane's absences. Did he smoke? No. He is particular about his lungs. Mr. Dykes? Occasionally. Mr. Haft? No. Miss Marr? No. Wolfe nodded again, filing it away. Now, he said, we consider sequence. Mr. Goodwin, the neighbor, observed a man leaving at 10:30. The maid heard a small sound thereafter. The body was discovered later. Therefore, either the note was placed before the departure, or after, by someone who did not leave. Meaning one of the guests, I said. Or the hostess, he said. Mrs. Hart stiffened. I have not accused you, Wolfe said. I have included you. She sat back, tight-lipped. I said, if the note was placed before 10:30, then the man who left could be our writer. Yes, Wolfe said. If after, then the writer remained. Which puts us back at the table, I said. Always, Wolfe said. Mrs. Hart leaned forward. And then what do we do? Wolfe's eyes rested on her, steady and unreadable. We invite them. Invite? All of them, he said. To this house. I blinked. That'll be cozy. Yes, Wolfe said. And instructive. Mrs. Hart stared at him. They won't come. They will, Wolfe said. Because each of them will wish to know what I know and what the others know. And what do you know? I asked. Wolfe's gaze shifted to me. That the table was indeed an honest witness. And what did it say? He closed his eyes. It said, he murmured, that one of your guests anticipated the need to communicate with a man already compromised, and that anticipation preceded the act. I let that sit for a second. Meaning? I said slowly. This wasn't improvisation. No, Wolfe said. It was preparation. Mrs. Hart's voice was barely above a whisper. Then a meal was marked before the dinner even began. Wolfe opened his eyes. Yes, he said. That settled something in the room. Not comfort exactly, but direction. When Wolfe says a thing like that, it isn't speculation. It's placement. He had taken the case out of the fog and set it on a track. Mrs. Hart was the first to feel it. Then one of them came to my dinner, already intending... She stopped, but the word was clear enough without finishing it. Yes, Wolfe said, and brought with him, or her, the means to exploit Mr. Vaughan. I said, which means the note wasn't a sudden inspiration, it was part of the plan. Precisely. And the plan needed Emile alive long enough to be useful, I added. Also precisely. Mrs. Hart's hands tightened again. But he wasn't alive. No, Wolfe said, which suggests either failure or necessity or panic, I said. Wolfe shook his head. No. Panic leaves disorder. Mr. Goodwin has described adjustment, subtle correction. That is not panic. I had to give him that. Whoever had used the candlestick had still cared enough to nudge the remaining one into place. That wasn't a man running blind. Mrs. Hart said, then why kill him at all? Wolfe regarded her. Because he ceased to be useful, or because he became dangerous? She swallowed. Dangerous to whom? That, Wolfe said, is what we shall discover. I moved to my desk and flipped open the notebook again. Let's put them in order, I said. Dykes, Taine, Haft, Vane, Marr. One of them knew Emile was asking questions about the Foundation. One of them prepared to use him, and one of them, possibly the same one, killed him. Not necessarily the same, Wolfe said. No, I agreed, but that would be neat. Neatness is rarely instructive, Wolfe said. Mrs. Hart said. You said we would invite them. Yes. When? Tonight. She stared. That's impossible. No, Wolfe said. It is merely inconvenient. They won't come. They will, he repeated. Mr. Goodwin will telephone them. He will say that information has come to light which bears directly upon the events of last night, and that their presence is required if they wish to avoid unfavorable conclusions. I grinned. That's a nice way of saying, come or be suspected. Yes, Wolfe said. Use your own phrasing if you prefer, but do not diminish the urgency. Mrs. Hart shook her head slowly. Mr. Dykes will come. He enjoys confrontation. Mr. Taine will come if he thinks he can control the room. Mr. Haft will come because he'll be afraid not to. Not Milo. She hesitated. He might not. Then you will persuade him, Wolfe said. And Evelyn? She asked. Wolfe's lips twitched. Miss Marr will come because she will not wish to be excluded from a scene. That sounded right. I picked up the phone. I'll start with Dykes. Lawyers like to hear their own name spoken. Before you do, Wolfe said, one more matter. I paused. Yes? The note. What about it? It was written in pencil, a quick hand, not a practiced script. So? I said. So, Wolfe said. It was written under conditions that did not favor deliberation. Which contradicts preparation, I said. Only if you assume the note was written at the same time as the plan was formed. I felt it click. You're saying the plan existed, but the note was improvised within it. Yes. Mrs. Hart frowned. I don't understand. Wolfe looked at her. The writer knew he might need to communicate with Mr. Vaughan. That was preparation. The exact form of that communication, the note, was decided later, perhaps in response to circumstances during the dinner. Such as? I asked. Such as the behavior of others at the table, Wolfe said, or the realization that direct contact would be observed. Which fits, I said. Clara saw Emile talking to someone but didn't see who. That might have been the attempt, and then the note was a backup. Or the reverse, Wolfe said. The note intended first, the conversation forced later. I nodded slowly. Either way, it wasn't random. No, Wolfe said. Nothing about this is random. Mrs. Hart said, then the key is who knew enough to plan it. And who had the opportunity to execute it, I added. Wolfe inclined his head. Yes. I started dialing. Leonard Dykes answered on the third ring. His voice was smooth, controlled, and faintly amused, which is how lawyers sound when they're not billing you. Mr. Dykes, Archie Goodwin for Nero Wolfe. A pause. Ah. I wondered how long it would take. That's flattering, I said. We're wondering how long it will take you to get here. Get where? Wolfe's office, this evening, 8 o'clock. And why would I do that? Because something has come up about last night, I said. Something you'll want to hear before Inspector Kramer does. Another pause. Longer this time. I see, he said. Very well, 8 o'clock. He hung up. I dialed Taine next. He was easier. Too easy. He agreed before I finished the sentence, which told me he thought he could handle whatever this was. And Haft took more convincing. Fear works better than persuasion with men like him, and I didn't spare it. Vane was reluctant, as predicted. Mrs. Hart took the receiver and spoke to him quietly, and whatever she said brought him around. Evelyn Marr laughed when I told her. Of course I'll come, she said. I wouldn't miss it. I hung up and turned back. They'll be here, I said. Good, Wolfe said. Mrs. Hart looked from one of us to the other. And then? Then, Wolfe said, we shall observe them. And accuse one of them? She asked. No, Wolfe said. Not immediately. Then what? Wolfe leaned back, settling into his chair as if preparing for a performance he had already rehearsed. Then, he said, we shall allow them to accuse themselves. I said, that's always my favorite part. He ignored me. Mrs. Hart sat very still. And if you're wrong? Wolfe's eyes met hers. I am not wrong, he said. There are times when that sounds like arrogance. This wasn't one of them. This sounded like structure, and if he was right, then in a few hours, 5 people would walk into this room carrying more than their coats. They'd be carrying whatever it was that had turned a dinner into a plan, and a plan into a death. And Wolfe would be waiting, exactly where he always is, to take it apart. The time between setting a trap and watching it close is never comfortable, especially when you're standing inside the same room where it's going to happen. Wolfe doesn't pace, and he doesn't fidget, but there's a way his eyes rest on things that tells you he's running through sequences again and again, trimming them down to what matters. Fritz announced dinner at 7, and Wolfe went to it with his usual dedication, which I've always admired even when I've resented it. Mrs. Hart declined food, but accepted coffee, and I stayed with her in the office while Wolfe conducted his more sacred business in the dining room. She sat where she had been, hands folded now, the earlier agitation pressed down into something tighter. "You believe him," she said. "I believe he believes himself," I told her. "That's usually enough." "And you?" "I think one of your guests came to dinner with more on the menu than duck." She didn't smile. "And you're not afraid?" "Of what?" "That you might be wrong." "I'm always wrong about something," I said. "The trick is not to be wrong about the important thing." She considered that. "And what is the important thing?" "That whoever planned to use Emile had a reason that didn't depend on chance," I said. "And that reason didn't disappear when Emile did." Before she could answer, Wolfe returned, settled into his chair, and accepted coffee from Fritz with a nod that meant the meal had met his standards and the world could proceed. "Archie," he said. "Yes?" "Position the chairs." I got up and did it, 5 in a loose arc facing Wolfe's desk, one slightly apart for Mrs. Hart. It wasn't decoration. Wolfe arranges people the way other men arrange arguments. At 7:45, the bell rang. I went to the door. Leonard Dykes came in first. He was tall, as advertised, with the kind of face that looks composed even when it isn't. His coat was dark blue. I noticed that without appearing to. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "I trust this will be worth the inconvenience." "I always aim to please," I said. "Come in." He stepped into the office, nodded to Mrs. Hart, and gave Wolfe a look that tried to be casual and missed by an inch. "Mr. Wolfe." "Mr. Dykes," Wolfe said. "Be seated." Dykes chose a chair that gave him a clear view of everyone else. That told me he liked to watch. Next came Russell Taine. He had charm the way some men have cologne, applied generously and meant to linger. He greeted Mrs. Hart warmly, shook my hand as if we were partners in something, and inclined his head to Wolfe with practiced ease. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm intrigued." "You will be," Wolfe said. Julian Haft arrived, looking as if he would have preferred to be anywhere else. He avoided Mrs. Hart's eyes, sat quickly, and adjusted his cuffs twice before settling. The men who manage money often manage their hands badly. Milo Vane came in quieter than the others, with a kind of distracted intensity. He nodded to Mrs. Hart, barely acknowledged the rest of us, and took a seat at the end of the arc. Evelyn Ma was last. She swept in, took in the room in a single glance, and smiled. Not pleasantly, but with interest. "Well," she said, "this promises to be entertaining." "That depends," I told her, "on your definition of entertainment." "Watching people reveal themselves," she said. "Then you're in the right place," I said. She sat. The room settled. 6 chairs filled, Wolfe behind his desk, me at mine, Mrs. Hart slightly apart. It had the feel of a courtroom without a judge, or a stage before the curtain lifts. Wolfe let the silence sit just long enough to become uncomfortable. "So thank you for coming," he said. "You have been invited because each of you was present at a dinner last evening at Mrs. Hart's residence. That dinner was followed by the death of a man named Emile Vaughan. There was a shift, not much, but enough. Taine's charm tightened, Haft's hands stilled, Vane's gaze sharpened. Dykes remained composed. Evelyn watched. Wolfe continued. "The police have investigated and will continue to do so. I am not here to duplicate their efforts. I'm here because an element has emerged which alters the significance of events at that dinner." He paused. "A note," he said, "bearing the words, Ask for Emile. That did it. Not dramatically. No one leapt or protested. But I saw it. The quick flicker in Taine's eyes, the tightening at the corner of Haft's mouth, the fractional stillness in Dykes's shoulders. Vane frowned. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "What note?" Taine said. "A note found on the dining table after it had been cleared," Wolfe said. "Its presence was not observed during the meal. It appeared afterward." "That's absurd," Haft said. "No one." "Mr. Haft," Wolfe said, "you will have an opportunity to speak." Haft shut his mouth. Dykes spoke instead. "And what is the relevance of this note?" Wolfe regarded him. "That depends on who wrote it." "And you think one of us did?" Taine said lightly. "I think," Wolfe said, "that the writer was present at that dinner." "That's ridiculous," Taine said. "Is it?" Wolfe asked. Evelyn laughed softly. "Oh, I hope not." Vane said, "What does it matter? The man is dead." Wolfe turned to him. "It matters because the note indicates prior knowledge. Specifically, that Emile Vaughan was a person to whom one might apply for something." "For what?" Vane asked. "Access," Wolfe said. "To what?" Dykes said. Wolfe's gaze moved across them. To information, to opportunity, possibly to the manipulation of events. Haft shifted in his chair. "This is speculation." "No," Wolfe said. "This is inference." Taine leaned back. "Even if someone wrote such a note, it proves nothing. It could have been written by anyone, someone not even present." "No?" Wolfe said. Why not?" Taine asked. "Because of when it was placed," Wolfe said. "After the table was cleared, after the cloth was smoothed, a small sound was heard, a slight disturbance observed. The writer returned to that room. Silence. Wolfe let it sit. "Which means," he said, "that the writer had both the opportunity and the motive to do so." Dykes said, "You still haven't established motive." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "I've established its existence. Mr. Vaughan had been making inquiries into the finances of the Belport Foundation." That landed harder. Haft's head came up. "That's not true." "It is," Wolfe said. "On whose authority?" Haft demanded. "On Mrs. Hart's," Wolfe said. All eyes turned to her. She met them one by one. "Yes," she said. He had. Taine's voice was softer now. "You didn't tell us that." "No," she said. Dykes spoke quietly. "That changes things." "Yes," Wolfe said. "It does." Vane leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that one of us—" "I'm suggesting," Wolfe said, "that one of you knew." The room tightened again. "Which one?" Evelyn asked, almost eagerly. Wolfe did not answer immediately. He looked at each of them in turn, not searching but confirming. And then he said, very calmly, "The one who anticipated the need to communicate with him." No one spoke. And in that silence, something shifted. Not outwardly, not enough for anyone who wasn't looking for it. But it was there. A small adjustment, like a candlestick moved half an inch to hide an absence. And Wolfe saw it. If you've ever watched Wolfe at the moment he decides he has enough, you know the room changes again, not with noise, but with pressure. It's like a door closing somewhere you can't see. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. But he stopped looking at all of them and settled on one. "Mr. Taine," he said. Taine smiled, because that's what men like him do when they think charm is still in play. "Yes?" "You smoke?" Wolfe said. Taine gave a small shrug. "A vice among many." "Strong cigarettes," Wolfe continued. "Not commonly favored." Taine's smile held. "I prefer what I prefer." "Yes," Wolfe said. "And last evening in Mrs. Hart's sitting room, you left one behind." Taine's smile didn't vanish, but it lost something, like a light turned down a notch. "That proves I was there," he said lightly, "which is hardly a revelation. No, Wolfe said, but it places you in proximity, and more importantly, it aligns with a pattern. Pattern, Dykes said. Wolfe did not look at him. Mr. Goodwin observed that after the removal of the table settings, the remaining candlestick had been adjusted, moved slightly to compensate for the absence of its pair. So, Taine said. So, Wolfe said. That act implies a concern for appearance, a desire to restore symmetry. That could be anyone, Taine said. Not quite, Wolfe said. It requires both awareness and inclination. Most people do not notice such imbalance. Fewer still correct it. Evelyn laughed softly. He's saying you have taste, Russell. You should be flattered. Taine didn't look at her. His eyes were on Wolfe now, and the charm had thinned further. This is flimsy, he said. Yes, Wolfe agreed. On its own. There it was. The hook set but not pulled. Wolfe shifted slightly in his chair. Let us consider sequence. Mr. Goodwin has reported that a neighbor observed a man leaving Mrs. Hart's apartment at approximately 10:30. Tall, in a dark coat. That describes half of us, Dykes said. Indeed, Wolfe said. Including you. Dykes inclined his head. Of course. But, Wolfe continued, Mr. Taine, aren't you have admitted to lingering near the dining room after the others had moved to the sitting room? I said I paused, Taine corrected. Yes, Wolfe said. And during that pause, the opportunity existed to enter the dining room alone. So did it for anyone, Taine said. No, Wolfe said, because the others had no stated reason to remain behind. You did. Taine's voice sharpened slightly. Which was? Control, Wolfe said. That landed. Taine's smile was gone now. You're reaching. No, Wolfe said. I am proceeding. He turned his head slightly. Mrs. Hart, you stated that Mr. Taine has a tendency to manage situations. Yes, she said, and that he remained near the dining room when others departed. Yes. Wolfe nodded, then looked back at Taine. You were in position to place the note. That proves nothing, Taine said. Anyone could have written it. Yes, Wolfe said, but not everyone would have known to write it. Silence. Wolfe let it deepen. Mr. Vaughan, he said, was not known to be a conduit. His inquiries were discreet. His role as a waiter concealed them. That's your claim? Haft said. No, Wolfe said. It is Mrs. Hart's statement, corroborated by inference. If Mr. Vaughan was investigating the Foundation's finances, then someone within that circle would have reason to monitor him. Haft shifted. You're implying... I am stating, Wolfe said, that the person who wrote that note knew that Mr. Vaughan could be approached for information. Dykes spoke quietly. And you believe that knowledge was limited? Yes, Wolfe said. Why? Dykes asked. Because if it were widespread, the note would be unnecessary, Wolfe said. Direct contact would suffice. Vane leaned forward. Unless direct contact was risky. Precisely, Wolfe said. Which brings us to method. He paused, then said, Mr. Taine, you manage the Foundation's operations. Yes, Taine said. You oversee its daily activities. Yes. And you would be in a position to notice irregularities in staff behavior. Taine's jaw tightened. If they existed. They did, Wolfe said. And you noticed them? No, Taine said. Yes, Wolfe said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Taine leaned forward now, no longer relaxed. You're making assumptions. I am making deductions, Wolfe said. You knew that Mr. Vaughan was asking questions. You anticipated the need to control that inquiry. You prepared to use him as a channel. That's absurd, Taine said. Is it? Wolfe asked. Then explain the note. I didn't write it. Then who did? I don't know. Then you are either ignorant or lying, Wolfe said. Taine's eyes flashed. I won't be spoken to like this. You will, Wolfe said, "or you will leave and be spoken to by Inspector Kramer under less agreeable conditions." That held him. Wolfe continued, "You paused near the dining room. You had the opportunity. You had the knowledge. You had the inclination to restore appearances, and you left behind a cigarette consistent with your habit." "That's circumstantial," Dykes said. "Yes," Wolfe said, "which is why we require more." He turned his head slightly. "Mr. Goodwin." I knew what was coming. I reached into my pocket and took out the small envelope I had lifted from the sitting room before leaving earlier. Not evidence in the legal sense, but in Wolfe's sense, which is often more effective. "Found in the ashtray," I said. "Your brand, Mr. Taine." Taine glanced at it. "So?" "So," I said. "It's not the cigarette. It's what's on it." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the envelope and tipped out the butt onto a small tray. "Lipstick," I said. That stirred the room. Evelyn leaned in. "How interesting." Taine's eyes narrowed. "I don't—" "Not Mrs. Hart's shade," I said. "Not Miss Mars either, which leaves—" "Milo doesn't wear lipstick," Evelyn said dryly. "No," I said. "But someone else might have been close enough to leave a mark." Taine's face had changed now. Not dramatically, but enough. Wolfe said quietly, "You spoke with Mr. Vaughan in the passage." The maid observed a dark sleeve. During that exchange, the note was either discussed or conceived. Later, as you returned to the dining room and placed it. Then, when Mr. Vaughan became a liability, you followed him to the pantry. "That's a lie," Taine said. "Is it?" Wolfe asked. "Yes." "Then tell us," Wolfe said, "why you left at 10:30. Taine stopped. No one spoke. Wolfe waited. That's the part people underestimate. He doesn't force the answer. He makes the silence do it. Taine looked around the room as if one of the others might supply something. Support, denial, anything. They didn't. Finally he said, "I had a call." "From whom?" Wolfe asked. "No one here." "Name?" Wolfe said. Taine's mouth tightened. "I don't recall." "Convenient," Wolfe said. "It was unimportant," Taine snapped. "Yes," Wolfe said, "as was the death of Mr. Vaughan." "That's not what I said." "No," Wolfe said, "but it is what you imply." The room had gone still again. But this time, it wasn't anticipation, it was recognition. Because whatever else was still hidden, one thing had become clear. The circle had narrowed. And Russell Taine was at its center. Taine didn't break, not immediately. Men like him don't, they adjust, like that candlestick, trying to restore balance even when the symmetry is already gone. "This is ridiculous," he said, but the ease had drained out of it. "You've built a story out of nothing. A cigarette, a note no one saw placed, and a servant's guess about a sleeve." Wolfe regarded him without expression. "You are mistaken. I have built a structure. You are merely standing in the center of it." Dykes shifted slightly, watching Taine now with more interest than before. Haft looked as if he wanted to disappear into his cuffs. Vane leaned forward, intent. Evelyn was enjoying herself, and Mrs. Hart didn't move at all. Taine said, "Even if I spoke to the waiter, and I'm not admitting that, there's no proof I killed him." "Correct," Wolfe said. That surprised him. It surprised everyone. Wolfe went on, "The act of homicide has not yet been attributed to you conclusively." Taine blinked. "Then what?" "What has been established," Wolfe said, "is that you possessed knowledge, opportunity, and motive to initiate contact with Mr. Vaughan." "That's not a crime," Taine said quickly. "No," Wolfe agreed, "but it is a beginning." I saw it then, the shift. Taine had been bracing for an accusation. Wolfe had stepped sideways, and that meant he wasn't finished. Wolfe turned his head slightly. "Mr. Haft?" Haft jerked. "Yes?" "You manage the Foundation's finances?" "Yes." And you have stated that, Mr. Vaughan's inquiries were non-existent. Yes, yet Mrs. Hart asserts that they occurred. She's mistaken. Are you? Wolfe asked. Haft swallowed. There was nothing unusual. Wolfe's gaze held him. Then you will have no difficulty explaining a discrepancy? What discrepancy? Haft asked too quickly. The one that prompted Mr. Vaughan's inquiries, Wolfe said. Haft's hands tightened again. There isn't one. Wolfe let that sit, then said quietly, Mr. Goodwin, I didn't have anything in my pocket this time. I didn't need to. Wolfe wasn't calling for evidence. He was calling for timing. At 10:30, I said, a man leaves the apartment. Shortly after, the maid hears a small sound in the dining room. Later, the waiter is found dead in the pantry. No signs of struggle elsewhere. Dykes said, which suggests the killing occurred in the pantry. Yes, Wolfe said, and that Mr. Vaughan either went there voluntarily or was followed there. Vane said, why would he go there voluntarily? To retrieve something, Wolfe said. Silence. Mrs. Hart leaned forward slightly. The note. Yes, Wolfe said. If Mr. Vaughan saw the note, he would interpret it as an instruction. Ask for Emile, a signal that someone wished to contact him under a pretense. And he would go to the pantry, Vane asked. Where a waiter might expect to conduct a private exchange, Wolfe said. Dykes nodded slowly. That makes sense. Taine said, or he was already there and someone followed him. Also possible, Wolfe said, but less efficient. Evelyn said, efficiency again, you're fond of that. It is often decisive, Wolfe said. He turned back to Taine. You left at 10:30. Yes, Taine said, and you did not return. No. Therefore, if the note was placed after your departure, you are excluded as its writer. Taine seized on that. Exactly. Yes, Wolfe said. If. That hung there. And if it was placed before, Dykes said, then the writer could have left immediately after. Indeed, Wolfe said. Which returns us to intention. Haft shifted again. This is going in circles. No, Wolfe said. It is narrowing. He turned to Mrs. Hart. When you returned to the dining room and found the note, what did you do? I picked it up, she said. Immediately. Yes. You did not examine the table further. No. You did not notice anything else? She hesitated. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Madam? There was... She stopped. What? Wolfe said. A faint mark, she said. Near where the note lay. My head came up. What kind of mark? Nothing clear, just a smudge. I didn't think it mattered. Color? Wolfe asked. Gray, like pencil. Wolfe leaned back slightly, as one would expect. Taine said, this is absurd. A smudge proves nothing. No, Wolfe said, but it confirms placement. Dykes said, you're still missing the critical point. Which is? Wolfe asked. Why? Dykes said. If Mr. Taine intended to use the waiter, he would then kill him. Yes, Wolfe said. That is indeed critical. All eyes shifted again. Wolfe let the silence build. Then he said, because Mr. Taine was not the only one who knew. That changed everything. Taine's head snapped toward him. What? Wolfe didn't look at him. He was looking at Haft. Mr. Haft, he said, you have been very concerned with denying the existence of irregularities. Because there aren't any, Haft said, but it came out thinner now. And yet, Wolfe said, you reacted to the mention of a discrepancy before I described it. Haft opened his mouth, then closed it. That suggests knowledge, Wolfe said. Specific knowledge. Dykes leaned forward. You're saying Haft knew as well? Yes, Wolfe said. Haft shook his head. No, I didn't. You knew that Mr. Vaughan was asking questions, Wolfe said. You knew what he might find, and you knew what that would mean. That's not, Haft began. And, Wolfe continued, you had a stronger motive than Mr. Taine. That hit harder than anything so far. Taine stared at Haft. What is he talking about? Haft's face had gone pale. Nothing. Wolfe said, Mr. Taine sought control. So you sought concealment. I didn't. You altered records, Wolfe said. The room froze. Haft's lips moved, but no sound came out. You diverted funds, Wolfe said, and concealed the discrepancies. Mr. Vaughan's inquiries threatened to expose that. That's a lie, Haft whispered. No, Wolfe said. It is the explanation. Taine leaned back slowly, eyes on Haft now with a different expression entirely. Julian? Haft shook his head, but it was automatic, without force. Wolfe said, Mr. Taine prepared to use Mr. Vaughan to control the flow of information. Mr. Haft, recognizing the same threat, took a more direct approach. No, Haft said again, but it was weaker. You followed Mr. Vaughan to the pantry, Wolfe said. You confronted him. You used the candlestick. Haft's breathing had changed. Quick, shallow. And afterward, Wolfe said, you returned to the dining room. Haft's eyes flicked up. You saw the absence of the candlestick, Wolfe said. You adjusted the remaining one. You noticed the note, or perhaps you did not. But you corrected the symmetry. Evelyn whispered, Oh. Taine said nothing. Dykes watched, intent. Vane sat very still. Mrs. Hart didn't move. Haft shook his head, but now it wasn't denial. It was collapse trying to hold shape. I didn't mean to, he said. No one spoke. He wouldn't stop. Haft's voice broke. He said he'd go to her, to the police. And you prevented him, Wolfe said. Haft's hands dropped to his knees. I had to. There it was. Not shouted, not dramatic, just said. And that was enough. I got up, went to the phone, and dialed. When Kramer answered, I said, Inspector, you'd better come back. Now we've got something you'll want to hear before it gets cold. Behind me, Wolfe didn't move. He didn't need to. The table had spoken, and this time, everyone had heard it. If you've ever seen a man realize he's finished, you know it doesn't always come with shouting or collapse. Sometimes it's quieter than that, like something inside him simply lets go of holding the structure together. Julian Haft didn't fall apart. He sagged. Not in his chair, not physically, but inward. The denial drained out of him, leaving something smaller and much less certain in its place. No one spoke for a few seconds after I hung up. Even Evelyn Marr, who had been enjoying herself, had gone still. Taine was the first to move. He leaned back, slow, eyes fixed on Haft. You fool, he said, not loudly, but with more weight than anything he had said all evening. Haft didn't answer. Dykes shifted, folding his hands. Well, he murmured, that simplifies matters. Does it? Wolfe said. Dykes glanced at him. The killing, at least. Yes, Wolfe said. The killing. And the note? Dykes asked. That brought the room back into alignment. Haft's head came up slightly. Not enough to meet anyone's eyes, but enough to listen. Taine said sharply now, yes. The note. You were so certain about that. Where does it fit now? Wolfe regarded him. Precisely where it belongs. And where is that? Taine demanded. Wolfe's gaze moved from him to Dykes. Mr. Dykes, he said. Dykes did not start. He did not flinch. He merely lifted his brows a fraction. Yes, Mr. Wolfe. You enjoy observation, Wolfe said, particularly of human behavior under pressure. I wouldn't deny it, Dykes said. You remarked at dinner that a table is an honest witness. I did. An interesting statement, Wolfe said. Not casual. Dykes inclined his head. Perhaps not. And you were seated, Wolfe continued, with a clear view of both Mr. Taine and Mr. Haft. Yes, and of Mr. Vaughan's movements as well. To an extent. Wolfe nodded. Enough to notice that Mr. Vaughan was not merely serving. Dykes said nothing. Wolfe continued. Enough to suspect that he was engaged in something more. Taine frowned. What are you? Wolfe raised a finger. Taine stopped. Mr. Dykes, Wolfe said, you perceived the same irregularity that Mr. Taine and Mr. Haft perceived, but from a different position. Dykes's eyes sharpened slightly. Go on. You had no operational control, Wolfe said. No financial exposure, but you had legal knowledge. And you had curiosity. That's hardly incriminating, Dykes said. No, Wolfe said, but it is explanatory. For what? Taine asked. For the note, Wolfe said. That shifted the air again. Dykes' smile thinned just enough to notice. You're suggesting I wrote it, he said. I'm stating it, Wolfe said. Taine let out a short laugh. Now this is getting entertaining. Evelyn leaned forward again. Oh, it is. Dykes's voice remained calm. On what basis? On the basis, Wolfe said, that you alone had both the perception and the detachment to act without immediate personal risk. That's speculation, Dykes said. No, Wolfe said. It is deduction. He leaned back slightly. You observed Mr. Vaughan's behavior, Wolfe said. You inferred that he was gathering information, and you recognized the potential implications for the Foundation and for those present. Dykes said nothing. You did not know, Wolfe continued, whether Mr. Taine intended to control the situation or whether Mr. Haft had already compromised it, but you recognized opportunity. Opportunity for what? Dykes asked. To expose, Wolfe said, or to profit. That landed. Taine turned sharply. Profit, Wolfe nodded. Information is valuable, Mr. Taine, particularly information concerning financial irregularities in a charitable foundation. Dykes's eyes flickered once. That was all. You anticipated that Mr. Vaughan could be approached, Wolfe said, but direct contact would be observed. Therefore, you devised an indirect method. The note? I said. Yes, Wolfe said. A simple instruction, placed where it would be found after the table was cleared. It would direct Mr. Vaughan, or anyone aware of his role, to initiate contact. Dykes said, That's a clever theory. It is not a theory, Wolfe said. It is consistent with your behavior. Which is? Dykes asked. You left shortly after, Wolfe said. At 10:30. As did others, Dykes said. No, Wolfe said. Not at that time. Dykes's eyes narrowed slightly. You placed the note, Wolfe said, and departed, intending to follow up later, or to allow events to develop. And instead, Taine said slowly, Haft killed him. Yes, Wolfe said. All eyes turned to Haft again. He sat slumped, staring at nothing. Dykes said, Even if that were true, it still doesn't prove I wrote the note. No, Wolfe said. But it explains the handwriting. Dykes's head tilted. The handwriting? Yes, Wolfe said. The note was written quickly, in pencil, without deliberation, not a practiced script. That suggests it was written under mild constraint, not time pressure, but concealment. So? Dykes said. So, Wolfe said. It was likely written in a place where writing was not expected. A small pad, perhaps, carried for professional use. Dykes' hand moved slightly, almost unconsciously, toward his inner pocket. Wolfe saw it. You carry such a pad, Wolfe said, as many attorneys do. Dykes's hand stilled. That proves nothing, he said. Sir, no, Wolfe said, but it aligns. Taine leaned forward. So let me get this straight. I plan to use the waiter. Haft killed him, and Dykes wrote the note. Yes, Wolfe said. And what? Taine said. Does that make the rest of us? Witnesses, Wolfe said. Evelyn smiled. How dull. On the contrary, Wolfe said. Quite instructive. Dykes exhaled softly. You've constructed a neat arrangement, Mr. Wolfe. But you lack proof. Wolfe's gaze held his. No, he said. I lack only your admission. Silence. Dykes looked around the room, at Taine, at Haft, at Mrs. Hart, at me, then back at Wolfe. And if I decline to provide it? He asked. Wolfe's voice was calm. Then Inspector Kramer will arrive shortly, he said, and Mr. Haft will repeat his statement in greater detail. Your role will emerge inevitably. Dykes considered that. You're relying on him, he said. No, Wolfe said. I am relying on sequence. Another silence. Then, slowly, Dykes smiled again, but this time it wasn't smooth. It had edges. Well, he said, I suppose there's no point in denying the obvious. There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, just placed, like a note on a cleared table. I wrote it, Dykes said. But I didn't kill him. I know, Wolfe said. Dykes's eyes flicked toward Haft. I didn't expect that. No, Wolfe said. You did not. The bell rang. Kramer again. Right on time. I went to the door and let Kramer in, and this time he didn't bother with preliminaries. He took one look at the room, 6 people seated, Wolfe behind the desk, me by the phone, and his eyes sharpened. Well, he said. Perfect timing, I told him. We've just finished sorting out who did what. All you need to do now is decide who gets which charge. That's so, he said, stepping in. Start talking. You'd better listen instead, I said, nodding toward Wolfe. He's got it arranged. Kramer moved forward, took a position where he could see everyone, and waited. Wolfe did not hurry, so he never does. Inspector, he said, you have before you Mr. Julian Haft, who has admitted to the killing of Emil Vaughan. Kramer's head snapped toward Haft. He what? Haft didn't look up. I struck him, he said, barely audible. He said he would go to the police. Kramer took a step closer. With what? Haft swallowed. The accounts, the discrepancies. Kramer's eyes flicked to Wolfe, then back to Haft. You'll tell that downtown. Haft nodded faintly. Kramer straightened, then looked around. And the rest of this circus? Wolfe said. Mr. Leonard Dykes wrote the note found on the dining table. Kramer turned. You did? Dykes didn't bother denying it this time. Yes. Why? Kramer demanded. Dykes shrugged slightly. Because I suspected the waiter was more than he appeared, and I wanted to confirm it, without being seen doing so. You could have asked him directly, Kramer said. And announced my interest to everyone present? Dykes said. Hardly efficient. Kramer grunted. So you wrote a note and left it like a breadcrumb? Yes. And then what? I left, Dykes said. I intended to follow up later. Kramer's mouth tightened. And instead you got a corpse. Yes, Dykes said. Kramer turned to Wolfe. And him? He jerked his thumb at Taine. Mr. Taine, Wolfe said, anticipated the same possibility as Mr. Dykes, that Mr. Vaughan could be used as a conduit. However, he did not write the note, nor did he commit the homicide. Taine let out a breath, half relief, half irritation. Finally, Kramer looked at him. You talked to the waiter? Taine hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. About what? Nothing explicit, Taine said. I wanted to see what he knew. And, Kramer pressed. Taine's jaw tightened. Enough to be concerned. Concerned about what? Kramer said. Taine didn't answer immediately. Wolfe did. About the exposure of irregularities within the Foundation. Kramer's gaze sharpened again. Irregularities? Haft made a small sound. Dykes said quietly, Embezzlement, Inspector. Kramer's head snapped back to Haft. That's so? Haft didn't answer. That's what he was afraid of, Dykes continued. That the waiter had found something. And you? Kramer said. You just wanted to watch? I wanted to know, Dykes said. Knowledge is useful? Kramer snorted. You're all a fine bunch. He turned to Mrs. Hart. And you knew? She held his gaze. I suspected. That's why I arranged the dinner. To flush it out, Kramer said. Yes. And you got a dead man instead. Her hands tightened, but she didn't look away. Yes. Kramer looked around the room again, taking it in, then shook his head. All right, here's how it goes. Haft comes with me now. Dykes, you stay available. I'll want a full statement. Tane, same for you. The rest of you don't leave town. No one argued. 2 uniformed men came in behind him, quiet and efficient. They moved to Haft. He stood slowly as if the effort required thought. I didn't mean to kill him, he said, not to anyone in particular. No one ever does, Kramer said. They took him out. The room shifted again. Not relief, not quite, but release. Kramer lingered a moment longer, looking at Wolfe. You had this from the start? He asked. No, Wolfe said. From the table. Kramer snorted. You and your tables. They are often more reliable than people, Wolfe said. Kramer shook his head, but there was something like respect under it. I'll be in touch, he said, and left. One by one, the others rose. Dykes paused at the door. Impressive, he said to Wolfe. You saw through all of it. No, Wolfe said. I saw what was there. Dykes smiled faintly and went. Tane followed, his charm gone, replaced by something harder. He didn't speak. Vane lingered a moment, looking at Mrs. Hart. I'm sorry, he said. She nodded. So am I. Evelyn was last. She paused, glanced back at Wolfe and smiled. That was worth coming for, she said. I'm gratified, Wolfe said dryly. She left, the door closed. Silence again. But this time it was the old kind, the one that belongs in the brownstone. Mrs. Hart remained seated. It's over, she said. For Mr. Haft, Wolfe said. For you, it is a beginning. She looked at him. Of what? Of restoration, Wolfe said. Or dissolution. That depends on your appetite. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had been lighter. You reduce everything to appetite? No, Wolfe said. I relate everything to it. She stood. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. He inclined his head. She turned to me. And you, Mr. Goodwin. Any time, I said. Preferably before dessert next time. That got the ghost of a smile. Then she was gone. I closed the door, went back to the office, and dropped into my chair. Well, I said. Dinner, a note, a dead waiter, and 3 guilty conscience for the price of 1. Wolfe closed his eyes. Not 3, he said. No, I asked. No, he said. Only 1 guilty. The others merely inconvenienced. I leaned back. You don't count writing the note as guilt. I count it as curiosity, Wolfe said. Dangerous, but not criminal. And Tane. Ambitious, Wolfe said. And therefore predictable. I nodded. And Haft? Wolfe opened his eyes. Hungry, he said. For money? For concealment, Wolfe said, which is often more costly. I let that sit. From the kitchen came the faint, reassuring sound of Fritz restoring order. The house had settled again. Beer? I asked. Yes. I got up, went to the kitchen and brought it back. Wolfe took a sip, then said, almost to himself, a table is indeed an honest witness. I grinned. Yeah, but it doesn't talk. Wolfe glanced at me. No, he said. It merely waits. I raised my glass. And you, I said, make it confess. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. But if you think a case ends when the police leave with the right man, you haven't lived in Nero Wolfe's house long enough. The next morning, everything was back where it belonged. Fritz moved through the kitchen like a priest restoring order after a minor heresy. Theodore had already gone up to the plant rooms. The brownstone had resumed its proper rhythm. Me at the desk, Wolfe in his chair, the world kept at a reasonable distance. Except it wasn't entirely at a distance. Wolfe had been silent for nearly 20 minutes, which is never accidental. He wasn't reading and he wasn't asleep. He was thinking, and that meant something hadn't settled. I let it go for another 5 minutes, then said, "You're not satisfied?" He opened his eyes. "No." "That's comforting," I said. "We've only got one confessed killer, one admitted note writer, and then one ambitious executive with sticky fingers in the air. What more could you want?" "Completion," he said. "We got that. Haft killed Vaughan. Dykes wrote the note. Taine was circling. The rest watched. Curtain." "No," Wolfe said. "Sequence." I sighed. "We went through sequence. You practically married it." "No," he said again. "We accepted a version of it." That got my attention. "Which part don't you like?" Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The note." Dykes admitted it. "Yes. And it fits. He had the pad, the curiosity, the distance." "Yes. And?" Wolfe's gaze moved to the desk. "Not seeing it. It was unnecessary." I frowned. "You just spent half the night explaining why it was necessary." "I explained why it functioned," Wolfe said. "Not why it was required." "Same thing," I said. "No," he said. "If Mr. Dykes suspected Mr. Vaughan's role, and he could have approached him later, privately, without risk." "Unless he wanted it to happen then," I said. "Why?" Wolfe asked. I opened my mouth, then shut it. "Because." I stopped. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Okay," I said slowly. "So the note wasn't just about contact. It was about timing." "Yes." "And that means—" I let it trail. "That means," Wolfe said, "it served more than one purpose." I leaned forward. "You think Dykes had another angle?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that Mr. Dykes is not a man who acts without advantage." "That's fair," I said. "So what's the advantage?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He reached for the envelope on his desk, the one Kramer had returned after making his own copies. He took out the strip of paper again. "Look at it," he said. I did. Same as before. 3 words. Quick hand, pencil. "Still says, ask for Emil," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said, "but consider the phrasing." "Okay." "It is not addressed," Wolfe said. "Not ask me for Emil, nor see Emil, nor Emil knows. It is indirect." "Yeah," I said. "We covered that." "Did we?" Wolfe asked. I looked at it again. "You think it wasn't meant for Emil?" "Yes." "Then who?" Wolfe's eyes met mine. "Mrs. Hart." I blinked. "What?" "Mrs. Hart," he repeated. "She returned to the dining room. She found the note. She read it." "Yeah, but—" "And she brought it here," Wolfe said. I sat back. "You're saying Dykes wanted her to find it?" "Yes." "Why?" "To provoke action," Wolfe said, "to force the matter into the open." I considered that. He could have just told her. "No," Wolfe said. "That would implicate him. This way, he introduces the element without ownership." I nodded slowly. "So the note wasn't just bait for Emil, it was bait for Mrs. Hart." "Yes." "And that means—" I stopped again. "That Mr. Dykes intended to accelerate events," Wolfe said. "Which he did," I said. "But he didn't expect Haft to jump ahead and kill the guy." "No," Wolfe said. "He did not." I exhaled. "So what's bothering you?" Wolfe looked at me. "Because," he said, "if Mr. Dykes intended exposure, he would not have left." That landed. I sat still for a second. "You're right." "He would remain," Wolfe said, "to observe, to control, to exploit." But he left at 10:30, I said. Yes. And the note was placed after the table was cleared, after 10. Yes. So he had time, I said. He places the note, then leaves. Wolfe shook his head. No. Why not? Because, Wolfe said, he did not leave. I stared at him. The neighbor saw a man in a dark coat, Wolfe said. Tall. That fits Dykes. It also fits Mr. Taine, Wolfe said. I felt it shift again. Wait, I said. You think Dykes stayed, and Taine left? Yes. But Taine said many things, Wolfe said. He also admitted to speaking with Mr. Vaughan. Yeah, and he had reason to withdraw, Wolfe said. To consider his position. I nodded slowly. So Taine leaves at 10:30? Yes. And Dykes stays? Yes. Which means... I leaned forward. He could have gone back into the dining room after. Yes. And seen the note? Yes. And then... I stopped. Wolfe's eyes were on me. And then, I said slowly, he could have followed Emile to the pantry. Yes. And no, Wolfe said. I blinked. No? No, he said. He did not kill him. But he was there, I said. Yes. And he knew what was happening. Yes. Then why? Because, Wolfe said, he did not need to. I sat back again. Okay, now I'm lost. Wolfe placed the paper on the desk. Mr. Haft killed Mr. Vaughan, he said. That is established, but Mr. Dykes was present. Doing what? Observing, Wolfe said. Why? To confirm, Wolfe said. To ensure that the exposure would occur, not through him, but through consequence. I stared at him. You're saying he let it happen? Yes, that's... I stopped. That's cold. Yes, Wolfe said. And illegal? I asked. Wolfe considered that. Not necessarily. I let out a breath. So Dykes set the stage. Taine stirred the water, Haft panicked and killed the man, and Dykes watched it happen. Yes. And then walked away clean. Yes. I shook my head. And you're not calling Kramer back for that? No, Wolfe said. Why not? Because, Wolfe said, I have no proof. And you don't like incomplete things, I said. No, he said, but I tolerate them. I looked at the paper again. Ask for Emile, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Turns out, I said, everybody did. Wolfe's lips moved just slightly. Human beings, he said, are seldom content with a single appetite. I leaned back, picked up my beer, and took a swallow. Yeah, I said. And sometimes they don't even know which one's going to cost them. Wolfe closed his eyes. The brownstone settled around us, quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Because somewhere out there, Leonard Dykes was walking free, having watched a plan unfold exactly far enough to serve him, and no further. And in here, Nero Wolfe had seen it, and understood it, and let it go. Not because he approved, but because, for once, the table had told all it was going to tell, and that, in Wolfe's world, was enough.